Tonight, Quincy will help us learn how to shift from gardening to farming and create an agile ecosystem that permeates your entire organization. Coming to you all the way from Atlanta, Georgia, Quincy Jordan.
Testing. All right. Hello.
Hello.
Glad to be here. So first, let me just start by saying, I know it's almost 6:30. It's late in the day. I really, really appreciate everyone coming, because it's hard to come late in the day to hear someone talk. So I will do my best to try to make it as upbeat as possible. I don't have an upbeat voice, that's just not in the cards, but I will do my best to do that. Hopefully you will really benefit from things that I want to share. And if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. Don't necessarily have to wait until we get to the end. If you want to wait until we get to the end, that's fine as well. But we will have time for some questions also. Why this topic is important. There are a lot of different large enterprises. They start really well. They spin up a team, things are going good. Then they say, oh, okay, well, let's just do this throughout the whole company. And then for some reason, it doesn't always seem to work. And it seemed like you should be able to go from 4 teams, do the same thing, and now you have 200 teams. But for some reason, it doesn't happen that way. All right, and there are a lot of reasons for that. There's some things that you have to consider. So just to level set, there's some assumptions that I want to get out and make sure that we're all on the same page. So when we say agile, what we're talking about is the need to respond to change. We're talking about a set of values that supports a set of principles that undergird practices throughout Agile. Now, Agile is not necessarily just one thing, it's more of a mindset. That mindset includes several different frameworks. Those frameworks may be Scrum, which a lot of people are really familiar with. It could be XP, it could be Lean, TDD, FTD, Crystal, DSDN. There are a whole host of different frameworks out there and different approaches for Agile. And hopefully for many of you, that's not new. So when we say transformation, what we're saying is you could have a spectacular perspective on doing something. You could know where you want to go and not necessarily how you want to get there, but you know the outcome that you want. And so when we're talking about transformation, we're saying going from doing things one way to doing it another way to reach a certain outcome. So even though you go from horse and buggy to a car, you're still getting from point A to point B. Even if you take a helicopter, you're still getting from point A to point B. But what we're not talking about is combining things that don't really make a lot of sense to combine. So we've heard of things like fragile and scrumfall and all these other things. And it's not that you can't combine things. You can combine things, but you have to keep in mind what your business outcome is. Because just because you change things doesn't mean that you've actually increased value at all. And so when we're talking about scale, what we mean is you can have a very high-performing team. I went too fast. You have a very high-performing team that's one superhero of a team. But when you scale, you're trying to have a slew of superheroes. You're trying to have several high-performance teams, not just one. All right, so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about what we mean when we say agile, what we mean when we say transformation, and what we mean when we say scale. All right, so there's a guy by the name of Matthias Willem Jens. Anyone familiar with this guy? All right, he's a guy from Belgium who has set the world record, the Guinness Book record for growing the largest pumpkin. 2,624.6 pounds. I mean, that's impressive. That's like really impressive. They had to use a forklift to bring this thing in. That's super impressive. All right. What ends up happening in a lot of companies? This is what they do. They grow a super impressive pumpkin. They have a high-performing team that has a great output, very spectacular, very impressive. The problem is, how many of these can you grow? Can you scale this? Can you scale a nearly 3,000-pound pumpkin? And if you scale it, can you move it? Can you do anything with it? And for folks that are into gardening and growing and so forth, like, this guy's like a rock star. I mean, he is phenomenal. Now, the person who he beat out that had previously set the world record for growing a pumpkin, these are some of the things that he did to grow the pumpkin. And you can Google it and look it up and see it for yourself. All right, so one of the things he did every night, according to this guy, every night, he would go outside and put a blanket over the pumpkin. Apparently it worked. He talked to the pumpkin. He gave the pumpkin a lot of care. All right. What's that?
It must come from the most sincere pumpkin.
The most sincere, I don't know. You have to ask Charlie Brown about that. But we'll see. But think about in organizations when they have a proof of concept for Agile. And that's what they do. They set it out, put a blanket over it. Are you guys okay? Is the team good? You're fine? Okay. Does the team need anything? Are you good? Okay, right? Want us to bring in lunch? Everything's fine. It's really, really, they give it a lot of attention. Problem is, as soon as they spin up other teams, it's like, treat them like they're just team number 25. They don't treat them like this, because that's hard to do for that. Now, again, this guy's famous in that world. This guy, on the other hand, no one knows who this guy is. He's just some guy that farms and produces a lot of pumpkins. However, his industry, his business is at $100 billion a year. Farmers, they don't get that same level of attention, and you can't give quite that same level of attention as the previous guy with the previous pumpkin. So when you start becoming an agile farmer, there's certain things that you have to change, and we'll talk about some of those things that you have to change that you just can't do when you have an agile garden or you're an agile gardener. So let's think about what's the purpose in a garden? Anyone?
Providing food.
Providing food. Okay, providing food for whomever consumes it.
For yourself.
Yourself,
Growing things.
growing things,
Planting seeds.
planting seeds,
And provide income.
having fresh supply. Someone said something.
And provide income.
To
Organic.
provide income for a garden.
In a garden.
No,
Okay.
that would be for a garden, maybe, or some other preposition. My bad.
Removing like critters and pests.
Okay.
Relaxation or a hobby.
Relaxation or a hobby. Okay.
Personal benefit.
Personal benefit. All right. So I'm going to stay with those last two because that's where I lean towards seeing a garden. A garden is usually really for personal benefit. It's for relaxation. It is to provide food, but the food is usually is provided to a small group. It's not intended for commerce per se. It's inward. It's like personal use. So when we think about the purpose of a farm, what's the purpose of a farm? Feed the masses, mass production,
Business.
Great income.
great income,
Business.
business. All right, and that is a big shift in the thinking. Because when you're creating a garden, you're thinking about how nice this would be for us. How great this is for us. How much do we like this? When you're thinking about a farm, you're thinking about how much will my customers enjoy what I am producing. It's a big mind shift from gardening to farming. So we'll take a look at, and just quickly talk about two examples. Spotify. A lot of people are familiar with the Spotify model. If you research a little further, what you'll find out is that Spotify started out using Scrum. When they decided to scale, they quickly began to realize this isn't scaling quite the way we want it to based off of how they were doing it. Can you scale Scrum? Absolutely, but at that time, they were not sure how. So to start scaling, they changed from a Scrum Master to an Agile Coach. They changed from a Scrum Team to a Squad. They changed from program level, sort of, to tribes. The main thing that I want to point out here is that they changed how they looked at it, and they had to. Oftentimes, we have Scrum teams that do really well, and we want to hold on to that so much that we're actually going anti-agile at that point because we're not allowing ourselves to grow. We're not allowing the teams to begin to transform, which is actually one of the reasons that I like transformation so much, because it's pretty methodology agnostic. You kind of do what works. And not only do you do what works, but you figure out what works within that particular client. Because what works in one does not necessarily work in another. There's certain rules that apply across the board, but in general, you have to modify the approach. The Lego company, similar to Spotify, they started out using Scrum. They wanted to start scaling. They quickly realized the way that we're doing it now is great, but we're having a hard time, and they became very frustrated with scaling. So they actually chose to go with safe. I thought about and looked at and said, well, you always start with soil, whether you're gardening or farming, which is kind of interesting because that's the environment. That's the environment that you're starting with. You always end with the light, which is the illumination. That's the continuous learning that has to take place. And in between, you have to water. That water sustains the growth and development of whatever it is that you're needing to do in your line of business. So oftentimes, Organizations that are doing really well, as I said earlier, they have decided that they're ready to go from gardening to farming in terms of Agile. And then what happens? They get really nervous. Oh, I can do it, we can do it. Wait, can we? Oh, I'm not sure. Wait, I think we can. It's not a big leap, we can do it. Yes, it was here. And then it's in. And then they're so happy that they did. Then they do it again. Say, oh, we're good at this now. Oh, well, I'm still a little nervous here. But they're trying to make that leap from gardening to farming. And they get there, eventually. It's not always the easiest thing. But farmers must consider where before what, and timing before time. So I'll explain what that means. Have you ever noticed when you go to the doctor, what's one of the first things that the doctor really wants to know? Besides your weight.
Insurance? No insurance.
Besides insurance.
Why are you here?
All right? Yes, they want to know why you're here. And yes, they do want to know what's wrong. But often they start with where. Where does something feel uncomfortable? Where does something bother you? You know why? Painful. Because if what's bothering you is your ankle, they don't need to x-ray your arm. And that's exactly what happens in a lot of organizations. All right, we're going to spin up 6 more software development teams. Okay, great. Is that where our pain points are, though? Is that where we need to focus? Because it could be in HR. It could be in finance. It could be in sales. It could be in marketing. It could be in a totally different area of that collective body. So farmers have to consider where before they consider what. The reason they have to consider where in a natural sense is where their farm is going to be located determines the type of crop they can grow. If you're in the insurance business, that's very important to know when you're trying to decide the type of farm that you're going to have, because you have to farm with that in mind. They also have to consider timing before time. So we think of timing and time as being the same thing, but they're actually not the same. A farmer has to consider seasons. So when you have a garden and you're a gardener, you can create your own seasons because you can cover your entire garden. You can put it in a greenhouse. You can make the conditions what you want them to be, just like an incubator lab, just like a dev studio, just like a proof of concept. You can control that environment, but when you scale and you become a farmer, you have things outside of your control that you have to cooperate with. Farmers cooperate with the seasons. Agile farmers cooperate with the fact that if you're a publicly traded company, yes, you can be really concerned about interesting problems and fun work and all those things, and you should, but you also still have to cooperate with the fact that you have shareholders, with the fact that there is a stock market that can snatch your stock price up and down, left and right, any which way, based on what you deliver at the end of the quarter. Those are things that you cannot ignore when you shift from Agile Gardening to Agile Farming. And that causes a lot of frustration for many teams and many early adopters with Agile, because they feel like you shouldn't have to do that. No, we just want everything to be organic, and that's good, but you still have to cooperate with the seasons and know that timing makes a difference now, and it didn't make a difference before. So the same way those same earlier adopters were very accepting of stepping into an agile framework, they also need to be very accepting to stepping into agile farming. All right, so one of the first things after deciding where that a farmer has to do, they have to ready the soil. They have to prepare the soil. They have to prepare the environment. And as they're preparing the environment, you can't take in a technical environment a slew of cubicles and think that you're going to have a collaborative environment. So you have to prepare the environment for that. That's the soil. You have to get those things prepared. You can't expect for collaboration to happen if there's a wall between us. Now, at the same time, you also can't expect for company or team morale to continue to be very high if folks don't have any privacy either. So there are a lot of other considerations that you have to make that, again, you don't have to consider as much when it's an agile garden as you do when it's agile farming. Your tools have to change. I am a big proponent, a super big proponent of stickies and Sharpies. When it comes to the war on transformation, those are my weapons of choice. But I recognize and I cooperate with the fact that if you have a company that is 2,000, 3,000, 1,500, 1,200 strong in your IT department, you're going to have to do something else in addition to that. Doesn't mean that you can't use the stickies and Sharpies anymore. It doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is you have to modify your tools, and sometimes you have to change your tools. And there's a lot of technology out there now to do that. There are apps where you can take pictures of a wall of stickies, and it will digitize those stickies for you. I forgot the name of the app, but if you're familiar with it.
Microsoft lets you do it on the whiteboard.
Microsoft Lens lets you do it on the whiteboard. It takes the sticky.
No, like if you write
If
on
you
the
write,
whiteboard.
yeah,
It's the
So-
Post-it, it's the 3M Post-it
the 3M plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
app.
So the tools are out there, but the main thing is you have to modify your tools. It doesn't mean that you can no longer use a hand shovel. It just simply means you can't use a hand shovel if you're trying to till a 1,400 acre piece of land. You have to change and modify that. Even when you think about the things that sustain development and growth in a natural sense, which is water, even that, you can no longer use a, what do you call it, watering can. You can no longer use a watering can when this is where you are. You're going to have to go with an irrigation system, which means now you have to start thinking levels of communities of practice. How can we sustain the continuous learning? What mechanisms can we put in place so that what one team learns in January isn't completely lost by April? Because you have to sustain the learning. So continuous learning needs to be part of that picture. And so you have to also consider the vantage point makes a difference. And what I mean by that is, this is a really, really nice close-up picture of tomatoes that have been growing. You have some that are ripe, they're ready. You have others that are not quite there yet. This is nice and organic. It looks really good. It's very, it looks very palatable. Looks like something you can consume. But when you start agile gardening, what you quickly find out is, bless you, what you quickly find out is this vantage point isn't as easy to come by. It's still there, but it's just much closer up. And as you continue scaling, there's something that becomes very, very apparent to me. When we were at a vantage point that was really close up, it looked very organic. The further out we go and the more that we can see of the total vision of the total farm, the more symmetric things start looking. They start having more structure to them. Structure is a bad word in Agile, I know. But structure is something that you have to have when you start Agile farming. When you start scaling, and in particular scaling and transforming at the same time, there's more structure, symmetry, there's more of that that's needed. Don't let go of the organic portion, but what you know is if you go all the way in, you can still see that. But if you stay there, you'll never get all the way out here. And you never get to the business outcomes that you really should if you do that. So another interesting thing that I came across, and I heard this years ago, and this just kind of put me in a position to research it a little bit further. So farmers do a thing that's called crop rotation. Has anyone ever heard of crop rotation? I would hope so. Why do farmers rotate crops?
Keeps the soil healthy.
Keeps the soil healthy. Remember, the soil is the environment. What are some other reasons?
Certain plants draw certain minerals from the soil, and if you keep growing the same crop from that soil, you'll deplete it completely of that, and it won't grow that anymore. So you have to rotate crops to take different minerals.
Yes. Have you ever noticed how teams that are performing really well, they're high-performing teams, everyone on the team is a rock star. But when they stay on the same product, on the same basic features for an extended period of time, they begin to get what I call transformation fatigue or agile fatigue. It's like they're depleting the soil of the nutrients. They have to rotate. We have to rotate the teams so that you don't always have the same team. This team, they're always the future team. This team, they always do testing. This team, they always do this. And they never rotate. You have to rotate the teams. Because the environment has to change. If they don't, we as humans, we tend to not only get bored with it, but we actually begin to get set in our ways, subtly agitated, somewhat frustrated, kind of start feeling like we're no longer working on interesting things anymore. We're no longer doing fun things. This is not improving my career. Like all these kinds of things start coming up in one's mind. But when they rotate the same way a farmer rotates crops, they don't run into that as much, and you have happier workers, happier employees. You have people that are looking forward to coming to work. They're looking forward to the work that they're doing because it's interesting because they're not doing the same thing over and over and over and over. Now, should you rotate teams every 4 years? No, not necessarily. But there should be some rotation, and you have to figure out what that rotation should be. It's not going to be the same for every organization. The same way, it's not the same for every crop. Neither is it the same for every soil. The soil in Japan grows a different kind of crop than the soil in Georgia. And it has different nutrients, it does a different thing, it has a different outcome. You have to keep that in mind. So when you're also thinking about Agile Gardening versus Agile Farming, there has to be an additional shift. So when we think modern Agile, so modern Agile starts talking about psychological safety. People need to feel safe to voice their opinions, to inject their ideas. They need to feel safe to do that. And in a garden, you can provide that safety, that psychological safety, and that's fine. But if you think about just an actual natural garden versus a farm, a farmer has to go a step further in providing a safe environment. A farmer has to start going to the point of being proactive to protect the farm, not just make it safe, because they know the intruders are coming. So when you start going towards agile farming, you have to know there's certain things that are going to come with that. You're going to start having more teams that are being compared to other teams, which does not work. But you have to anticipate that. You have to anticipate, okay, well, we have performance reviews. Wait, but if we have performance reviews and the whole team succeeds as a team, or the team fails as a team, and then you have this team over here that did really well, and this team over here that worked on this, they always get the easy stuff to do. You have to anticipate those things so that you can protect the safety environment. Does anyone know what this is? I'll be super impressed if anyone knows. All right. That is a farmer in Japan. He actually uses a robotic wolf to protect his farm. So maybe your teams have to start automating. You have to start looking at other things to help protect the safety of your team so that they're happier coming to work. And it's not, yes, you want folks to be happy, but it's not just to make an environment for everyone to be happy, but you do want folks to enjoy the work that they're doing. Does anyone know what this is? So I think I'm the only person that's allowed to be the little talker in the room. Any guesses? I think someone said it, but is it soap? No, it's not soap. Oh wait, what? It's not a way to distribute seeds, but it's seed related. It's foam. It's foam that they spray on the seeds when they anticipate frost coming, because they want to protect the safety of the seeds. The seeds were safe, so safety wasn't the issue. The issue became, how can we protect the safety? So we have safe teams, we have psychological safety, but how can we protect the environment that keeps the safety there? So when we're thinking agile gardening and agile farming, one is not better than the other. You just have to know what the fit is. You have to know the purpose in it. It's perfectly fine to have an agile garden. If you know this is our proof of concept, I was on a project, this was years ago, almost 20 years ago, and we did a proof of concept. It was actually for AT&T. We built a full-scale telephone company in the space of about this, and it was a proof of concept. That was the intent. That was the purpose. It was to demonstrate to AT&T, metro markets, this is the level of skill that we have and what we can do for them in their call centers. And that was the intent. We did not take that exact same proof of concept and say, now we can take this exact same thing, put it in your call center, and it's actually going to run your telephone company. Because there are other considerations when we started scaling that. But the intent was to prove that we could do it. So there's nothing wrong with the garden. But if you want to live off an agile landscape, you can't try to support a full city or full community with a garden. You have to scale up to an agile farm. questions? Any other questions? Yes?
Just actually a comment, but
Sure.
thank you for, being a low talker. No talker? Thank you for making the trek to Tampa.
Very
So
welcome.
welcome to Tampa.
Thanks for having me.
Really want to acknowledge you for such a beautiful presentation, the thoroughness of your analogy, the thoughtfulness, and the graphics, and how well it all tied together, and the steps, just inspirational, just on its face, in addition to the information that you provided about farming and farming. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes?
So you said something very interesting, that when you take a closer look, it's a beautiful organic tomato. And as you step back, you start to see the linear and the structure. In companies that are very waterfall and structured, is that not a danger point that they fall back into those very structured hierarchy models versus, so how do you get that balance of like understanding that it's not a process to put in place, but it's like a team to grow it, like grassroots up versus,
Yes.
on down?
So, and that's why I specifically termed that slide vantage point. Because everyone doesn't need to have the same vantage point. And that has to be understood. Those who are at the portfolio level, they do not need to get in the weeds. They don't. And they're probably going to mess everything up if they do. So you don't want them in the weeds. Now, at the same time, so they have to respect the weeds. And at the same time, the team, they don't need to start trying to make portfolio decisions. And they don't need to get consumed with any of that. They do need to understand the vision. They need to understand the basic problems that we're solving or the types of problems that we're looking to solve. But they don't need to know and don't have to be involved at that vantage point. It's actually dangerous for both to try to always overstep into someone else's territory. That's what I really enjoy and love about teams, like really well-functioning teams. And I don't mean just in Agile or just Scrum teams or just in sports, but when it's a really well-functioning team, everyone not only knows their role, but they know the other's roles and they respect those roles. Doesn't mean they can't ever step into the other roles, but they know them and they respect them. So the vantage point makes a big difference.
Sounds like a little bit of trust too.
Yes, trust is huge. So that's one of the other things. I'm sorry, going back to, no, I'm right back to you. Going back to, I'm sorry, question.
Oh, Anitra.
Anitra. Not you saying Anitra.
Didn't be around index.
Maybe that's what it was. Yeah. But that's, one of the other things, I forgot what I was going to say. One of the other things that, what was I talking about?
Trust.
Trust, yes. Trust is one of those things that it does not matter what the transformation is. It doesn't matter the company. You're going to have to not only know that trust needs to be there, that's one of those areas that you have to protect in terms of like that psychological safety is also the trust. So you have to intentionally do things to help build trust. When I go into organizations and I realize, okay, they don't have a collaboration tool, but they're wanting to scale. All right, so if you want to scale, then you have to change how you communicate. So one way of doing that, not the only way, but one way of doing that is by using something like Slack or HipChat or MS Teams or any of those things. And what I recommend for the very, very senior folks, like as senior as we can go, is for them to actually participate in the collaboration tool and ask what might be the dumbest questions. Because when people see that, they're like, man, if he asks that, everyone should know that. And it makes them know that, hey, I'm willing to put myself out there. It's all fine. It's all good. We can trust one another because we're all trying to get better. Yes?
Quincy, could you talk about one of your engagements that failed and why?
One that failed and why it failed. Yes. I don't know if I'll call it a failure. It's more, it didn't achieve what I wanted it to, but there were definitely some success there. But maybe that's still a failure, because it didn't do exactly what I thought. And so in that case, that particular case, there wasn't enough trust, actually. There wasn't enough buy-in at the senior level. There was buy-in verbally. There was buy-in even on paper. There wasn't buy-in in action. It was still, what's that? Yes. So it was still a sense of, okay, well, that's good, all right? You guys are enjoying yourself? Lunch is good? Great, okay. This is what I want you to do, and this is what I want you to do it, and you're gonna work over the weekend, and you're gonna do this, and you're gonna do that. Okay, you're kind of missing the point with what we're trying to do here. But, you know, if you can't, you have to get buy-in at least with certain key influencers. And if you can't get those folks, it's gonna be very tough. And your level of success will be limited. So that's the reason why I said, I don't know exactly how I would fully call it a failure, but definitely was not the glowing success, you know, that I felt like it should be.
So how would you handle a situation where the senior C-level people are buying into what they agree, but it's the middle management?
It's always the middle management.
They don't have a clue and seem to resist the entire transformation. What's your secret sauce for that?
So I don't know if I'll say there's a secret sauce, but there are definitely some approaches. One of which is oftentimes middle management, they don't know where they fit into the picture. That's the biggest issue. They don't know how they fit in.
Is it fair?
Is it?
Is it fair?
I think
Yes.
so. I think they're afraid that they're gonna be eliminated.
Correct. So let's say there's a transformation happening and you're starting to show charts and graphs and pictures and so forth and what teams look like and what this looks like and so forth. And oftentimes that middle management layer is not very present in those pictures and charts. And people pick up on that really quickly. They're like, so think about many of those that, say 4 years ago, when Scrum was like starting to just take everything by storm, and how all the project managers felt. They're like, oh, hey, this looks really good. All right, so you got a Scrum Master. Where's the project manager? And that would immediately cause some people to say, in their minds and in their actions,